fortune, but you don't have
or
to do,
fatal.
Yeah, you don't have to do that all the time. If you think that sometimes people who are right are punished, or the more moral a person is, the more that he's hated, it's not you alone that experiences that. You don't have to. You can find comfort in Antigone, or if you can say the race goes not to the swift. And why? I had a student came in and he said, you know what, I'm the best tackle on the team, but I never get a chance to play because I don't kiss up. And I said, then you're old Ajax, and what are you going to do about it? But that's the dilemma of Ajax and the Sophoclean play.
Right.
So that was some of the things in a more pragmatic sense the humanities were able to do. They were able to give a person a whole reference of knowledge so that they didn't have to live out and learn something by rote or they had an example. And the other thing is, it gave them a sense of beauty and style.
That's not optional. That's not optional for human beings. I mean, we are linguistic creatures, and we require an awful lot of cultural programming.
I think we do.
And every culture knows that. And so we're definitely in the situation where if we don't inculcate the wisdom of the past into our young people, then they are forced to regenerate that wisdom through painful and often fatal experience. Those are the options. And to study history and the humanities is to arm yourself against the sea of troubles and to become literate. And that is the core of the universities, and the universities have definitely abandoned that in the favor of this idiot narrative. You know, here's something you might find interesting. So I did a research study with one of my students just before I was basically, kicked out of the university for being persona non gratis. And we investigated two mysteries. The first was there a coherent set of beliefs that you could describe as politically correct? And the way we investigated that was to produce a very large body of political statements, and then to find out the degree to which people agreed with them, and then to analyze them statistically to see if there were patterns of belief. And we found two patterns of belief that were obviously commensurate with the notion of a politically correct set of beliefs. And one of them was like a politically correct liberalism, and the other was politically correct authoritarianism. And there's been quite a bit of research on the psychological front with regards to politically correct authoritarianism in recent years. So first of all, there is such a thing as politically correct beliefs, and there's an authoritarian version. But then you might also ask yourself, what predicts whether or not people will believe these theories? You know what the biggest predictor was? This is so horrible. It was low verbal intelligence. It was a bigger predictor than verbal intelligence is a predictor of grades or socioeconomic outcome. It was 0.45, a correlation whose magnitude you never get in a social science study, a walloping effect. And then the subsidiary predictors were, being female was one of them, being agreeable in temperament, which is a feminine personality temperament, and then having taken any courses that were essentially propagandistic in nature. And so part of the reason that people fall for this simplistic set of ideas is because, well, they are simple, and they're very attractive to people who want or require a unidimensional view of the world in light of both of its simplicity, let's say, but also its underlying proclivity also to identify a convenient enemy.
I think that's true. I had a student, I mentioned it in the Dying Citizen, but I had a student who once said to me, well, you know, this country is very unfair because Wyoming has one senator, I think at the time it was for 400,000 residents. And California at that time, we were 30 million, now it's 41. But we have to have 15 million people, and we only get one senator. And I said, now, why would that be? And he said, because the founders were not democratic. I said, yes, but why weren't they fully democratic? And do you have, the House was going to be elected the whole House flips every 2 years. It represents 750,000 people. So it is democratic, but it's balanced by the Senate that flips every 3 years. I mean, 1/3 only flips every 2 years. You have to be older. It represents states. It's America as defined by the individual 50 states, not the people. That's the House. And this then is balanced by the executive. And the person was so arrogant because he was so ignorant. But he had got this catchphrase in
Yeah.
his mind that America's a democracy and therefore the Senate's not democratic. And then, so I was very interested in this. And so I went in, when I was doing I didn't realize there was a whole body of scholarly literature attacking the Senate from law schools and from political science departments. The Senate is sort of the last target of the left. They're trying to change it. There's a whole body of research showing just how toxic and conservative and anti-liberal it is because it doesn't represent people. It represents states, and that the representatives in some states, senators in some states, have larger constituencies than Senate and the other. And the Supreme Court has already ruled one man, one vote as it pertains to House districts, and therefore it must rule that the Senate, each senator must be proportionally equal.
Yeah, well, it's not that, look, you can see that the idea of a distributed democracy has an instantaneous intuitive appeal. It takes a lot of sophisticated thinking before you can understand that there have to be intermediary institutions, right? And part of the purpose of a humanities education was to give people that wisdom. Say, look, the problem with radical democracy is that it can degenerate into rule by the mob, like impulsive rule by the mob. And that's the danger of populism, for example, of an untrammeled populism. And so you need intermediary institutions.
You can kill Socrates on one day.
And they have to be set up.
Vote to kill Socrates by a majority vote of the court, or you can vote to kill all the Middle-Indians on Monday and then decide the next day you don't want to do it and send a ship after the first trireme because the entire assembly has flipped in 24 hours from being murderous to semi-murderous. And that was what our founders knew, that it was very dangerous, but that knowledge is completely absent in this younger generation because the sources of that transmission in history departments or political science departments or government departments is not there anymore. And it's not there at K through 12. There is no civic education anymore. There's no body of music and art and tradition and literature and poetry that each do their part to make a citizen aware of how unique the system was. And so that's what I find really frightening is this collective amnesia in this generation especially. It took a long time, but this generation is the first that I've been aware of that is completely amnesiac about the past. It hates the past. It feels that history's melodrama.
Yeah, those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it. And so that was the role of the university. So look, we've used up our 90 minutes of time here on YouTube. We didn't get to talk about Donald Trump too much, but maybe we'll have an opportunity to do that again in the future. We did cover a fair bit of territory in relationship to the idea of citizenship and the role of the universities. And so I think that was useful and apt. And I do believe that, there are stellar opportunities on the educational front at the moment as the responsibility for proper education is abdicated by the universities. There's an economic opportunity and a conceptual opportunity. And, the US is a pretty damn dynamic place on the entrepreneurial front, and it certainly might be the case that new institutions will arise to fill the void that's left by the universities as they collapse. And it might be that places like Hillsdale are on the forefront of that. We'll see how that happens. Thank you very much for agreeing to talk to me today. And to all of you who are watching and listening on YouTube and associated podcasts, I'm going to talk to Dr. Hansen for another half an hour on the Daily Wire Plus platform. I like to delve into